Okay, when most of us look back at history, we tend to picture, dusty battlefields, static lines of soldiers, maybe some dry dates to memorize from a textbook. But today, we're throwing that textbook right out the window. In this explainer, we're going to completely reframe human history through an entirely different lens. We are going to look at the ancient world through the lens of bleeding-edge, high-stakes engineering. Let's dive right in.
Now consider the sheer mathematical impossibility of this historical mystery. 168 people against an empire of literally millions. I mean, on paper, it makes absolutely no sense, right? How does a microscopic force topple an established, massively populated superpower? To solve that ultimate equation, we really have to trace the monumental technological steps that got us there.
Think about this. Long before modern missiles or stealth jets even existed, ancient emperors conquered the known world using psychological terror, and what terrified populations from medieval Europe all the way to the ancient steppes described as exploding magic sticks. Seriously, imagine standing in a defensive line centuries ago, and out of nowhere, you're facing deafening thunder, choking smoke, and this invisible lethal force. You'd probably think the gods themselves were attacking you. But, as we know, it wasn't magic at all. It was the volatile chemistry of early gunpowder, first cooked up in the Song dynasty. It was, essentially, the birth of the modern superweapon.
So let's start with Section 1, Macroengineering, Ocean Bridges, and Siegecraft.
This brilliantly illustrates two total opposite extremes of ancient macroengineering. On one hand, you have the Persian Empire's drive to conquer geography itself. On the other, the Mongol Empire's systematic, calculated structural destruction. Both of these approaches required an absolutely staggering genius for manipulating the physical world around them.
Take Xerxes the Great, for example. When he needed to move his massive army into Greece, he didn't just build a few boats and hope for the best. No, his engineers created immense floating pontoon bridges right across the Hellespont. They tied hundreds of ships together with these massive flax and papyrus cables. Just think about the sheer complexity of that for a second. They had to calculate tidal forces, water displacement, and the structural integrity needed to hold thousands of heavily armed marching soldiers and cavalry. They literally paved the ocean. They transformed a totally unpredictable, churning body of water into a stable, engineered highway. It was an absolute logistical miracle.
Conversely, the Mongols definitely didn't rely on mindless, primitive charges at city walls like you might see in the movies. That's a complete myth. Instead, they deployed highly specialized siege engineers, often conscripted from territories they'd already conquered, to methodically bring resisting cities to the ground. We're talking about engineers who studied load-bearing structures, calculated the complex trajectories of massive counterweight trebuchets, and literally diverted entire rivers to undermine stone foundations. They mathematically dismantled walls piece by piece. It wasn't chaos, it was a highly organized, totally lethal application of physics and structural failure.
But large-scale destruction was really only half the equation. That brings us to Section 2, Microtactics, Phalanxes and Flower Wars. Under Alexander the Great, the legendary Macedonian phalanx wasn't just some random, chaotic wall of spears. Not at all. It was a highly organized, kinetic tactical machine. The vast blocks of infantry acted as this massive, immovable anvil of bristling pikes. But the hetairoi, the elite companion cavalry, well, they were the precisely calibrated hammer. They would identify weak points in the enemy line and strike with perfect synchronization. Moving thousands of men in this kind of coordinated mechanical unison required incredible discipline and tactical engineering. It was literally a human machine operating right there on the battlefield. Now, across the globe, the Aztecs engineered their own micro-tactics through these incredibly specific, terrifying ritual conflicts known as flower wars. Standard warfare, as we know, is usually about taking territory. But the sole calculated objective of these operations? Harvesting live human captives for ritual sacrifice. Just imagine the sheer psychological terror engineered into a battlefield where the enemy doesn't actually want a quick kill. Instead, they're actively coordinating to subdue you, capture you alive, and drag you all the way back to Tenochtitlan. It's a completely different, undeniably dark form of psychological engineering.
Which brings us to the moment we combine centuries of tactical evolution into one shocking event. Section 3, the ultimate asymmetry, how 168 conquered millions.
I want you to really think about this number, 168. Imagine the pure, calculated physics required for Francisco Pizarro and this truly microscopic force of Spanish conquistadors to march high up into the Andes, capture the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, and effectively topple an empire of millions. It forces us to ask, what is the ultimate technological multiplier? What exactly allows a single grain of sand to outweigh a massive boulder on the scales of history?
The sheer scale of this asymmetry proves, without a doubt, that brute force was entirely obsolete in this encounter. If the Battle of Cajamarca had been based on muscle, stamina, or raw numbers, those 168 men wouldn't even register as a rounding error against the massive Inca forces. The reality of this huge disparity means we're looking at an event where the rules of the game were completely, utterly rewritten by technology.
The secret to this unbelievable conquest? Well, it wasn't magic. It was a violent intersection of completely different technological eras. The conquerors utilized forged steel armor that turned deadly obsidian clubs and wooden spears into mere nuisances. I mean, incoming attacks simply bounced off. Add to that the volatile chemistry of early firearms, specifically arquebuses. To an empire completely lacking metallurgy or gunpowder, the concussive force, the smoke, and the invisible lethality truly seemed like supernatural magic. The physics of forged steel and the chemistry of gunpowder engineered a victory that numbers alone could never, ever achieve.
Let's dive into our final reframe. Section 4. Destruction as engineering breakthroughs.
Because when you really look at it, these ancient superweapons were actually our species' earliest, most brutal engineering breakthroughs. Think about it for a second. Boat bridges weren't just transport. They were massive solutions to impossible logistical hurdles. Flower wars weren't just chaotic combat. They were perfected systems of psychological terror. Gunpowder was the absolute dawn of applied chemical weaponry. And armor design, it wasn't just battlefield fashion. It was the total mastery of physical deflection and metallurgy. Every single one of these was a major engineering milestone, cleverly disguised as a weapon.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you look around at the rapid technological advancements of our own era. If the so-called magic of the ancient world was really just early engineering doing its work, what modern weapons are we developing right now that future historians will look back on as our greatest engineering breakthroughs? What exactly is the gunpowder or the boat bridge of our century? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the structure beneath the surface, and I'll see you next time.